This is the fourth chapter of Insurrectionary Ecology, and it's on organisation. It's the longest chapter, I think. It makes up the bulk of the book, or the pamphlet. It's called How We Do Things is Important, and it starts with a quote from D.H. Lawrence. When we get out of the glass bottles of our egos, and we escape like squirrels turning in the cages of our personality and get into the forest again, we shall shiver with cold and fright, but things will happen to us, so that we don't know ourselves. Cool, unlying life shall rush in, and passion will make our bodies taut with power. We shall stamp our feet with new power, and the old things will fall down. We shall laugh, and institutions will curl up like burnt paper. People often feel uneasy about organisation. You feel like you give part of yourself up to it. The communication we feel most comfortable with tends to be the conversation. Our most comfortable social structure is the trusted group of friends. These are the ways that we generally prefer to organise our everyday lives. Sometimes the tasks we take on and the people we need to cooperate with to achieve our goals require us to go beyond the comfort zone of these everyday relationships. If we hold to the ideas of process, people, ideas, and situations evolving, and of subjectivity, the participation and importance of the individual, as being important, and if we wish to evolve a society without hierarchy and domination, and with cooperation and mutual aid, then how we go about things is vital. You can't separate yourself from what you do. Your experiences shape you. If this is true, and the experimental process develops us, then the tenet, the ends justify the means, is false. It is more than likely that when you reach the ends, the situations yourselves have been changed out of context by your actions. It is from this perspective I'd like to have a brief look at how we organise ourselves and our actions. Although over the years there has been much criticism of mass organisation, mass actions and mass movements, where the organisation and control is by the few and the attendance is by the many, there are still many groups working this way. Organising this way can be a temptation when you feel it would be good to get a lot of bodies on the streets or into the fields, and you don't feel you have the time or capacity to do the proper groundwork. Other groups just want to maintain control. A mass movement mirrors the structure of mass society, a superficially united mass of alienated individuals. In mass society, the mass is controlled by factors such as the state, corporations, media, and the spectacle. Mass movements are controlled by cliques, committees, and ideologies. That's from Earth First. Ha ha ha. Self-published EF rant. Besides the loss of control of the individual, mass organisation homogenizes us without recognizing our diversity and alienation. The desire for a united opposition can obscure and suppress real differences that will eventually have to be faced. The principle of unity is based on the proposition that everyone is a unit, fragment. Unity means one multiplied by itself. We are going to say it straight. Insofar as unity has suppressed real political differences, class, racial, sexual, it is a form of tyranny. The dream of unity is in reality a nightmare of compromise and suppressed desires. We are not equal, and unity only perpetuates inequality. That's from Anti-Mass, Methods of Organization for Collectives, and Methods for the Communalization of Confusion, a situation critique of anti-mass. Appeals for community and demands for unity don't make it real. It is a process that can only evolve through genuine relationships and common bonds. People will eventually become disillusioned with pretense and discard the social bonds that are needed for a cooperative society. We have nothing in common except the illusion of being together. Certainly the seeds of authentic collective life are lying dormant within the illusion itself, but real community remains to be created. The power of the lie sometimes manages to erase the bitter reality of isolation from men's minds. In a crowded street we can occasionally forget that suffering and separation are still present. And since it is only the lie's power that makes us forget, suffering and separation are reinforced. But in the end, the lie itself comes to grieve through relying on this for support. For a moment comes when no illusion can measure up to our distress. Excluded from genuine participation, men's actions stray to the fragile illusion of being together, or else remain locked in its opposite, the brutal, total rejection of social life. That's in the revolution of everyday life. As mass organisation is an authentic participation, it becomes symbolic, obscuring real change and understanding. Here again we see the truth of the argument that power's strength lies in its facility in enforcing both actual separation and false union. A recurring theme in the history of radical organization is that of collectives, as an antidote to mass organization. And this is a quote. Opposed to this mass organization is face-to-face full participation and communication of self-managed small groups or collectives. That's from the Earth First rant. As a further limit on the centralization of power, some advocates of collectives believe in only taking local small-scale action to maintain full participation and self-management. Others believe that we should carry on experimenting to develop ways to coordinate large-scale insurrections without compromising these principles. In other parts of Europe, anarcho-syndicalists have used various collective structures organized by delegated communities, delegates being recallable and only relating decisions of the collective, as opposed to representatives who are given authority to speak on behalf of others. In more recent British history, some elements of the peace movement have had very deliberate collective structures. The world turned upside down street parties and living situations of reclaim the streets initially had great success using cooperation between collectives and participations of individuals. Police clampdowns and repetitive formulas make organizers into secretive cliques and participating individuals into punters. Insurrectionist parties transformed into mass actions or countercultural events. The key to organizing a successful collective large-scale insurrectionary action, it seems, is not the desire of a small organizing group or reaction to the maneuvering and agendas of authority, but involved individuals and cohesive groups that are motivated to work together by a real need or an idea that captures the popular imagination. This means that large-scale insurrection would need a lot of popular understanding, consent, and participation to happen, which in my opinion is the way it should be. Experiments in large-scale collective coordination continue to evolve and be defended in action-convergent spaces around the world. By using collective structures, people can participate in the process of change, which at the same time changes themselves. The collective is an alternative to the existing structure of society. Changing social relations is a process rather than a product of revolution. In other words, you make the revolution by actually changing social relations. You must consciously create the contradictions in history. Concretely, this means organize yourselves, not somebody else. The answer to alienation is to make yourself the subject, not the object of history. And that's from Anti-Mass, Methods of Organization for Collectives. It is important to treat the collective as an organizational tool to be used when a group of people want to achieve something, rather than collectivism as an ideology where dysfunctional collectives atrophy and informal hierarchies develop internally. This demands a commitment to the principles underlying collectives and an appreciation of the realities of ever-changing circumstances. Fluid communities still require commitment to challenge informal power structures and hierarchies, tyranny of structuralistness, and to encourage active participation and supportive interaction. In this context, the collective is the time-honored structure that allows people to come together freely when needed for a temporary period for a specific focus, task, or action, using consensus as a tool, not a rule. With various levels of investment, you can be part of several different ones, and have access to the variety and freedom of ideas, the ebb and flow of energy, and the endless permutations and combinations of relationships with different people at different intensity and different contexts that goes with the diversity of a live community. And that's from exist to resist versus exist to exist. Even when the collective is defined by affinity, trust, and the ability to have authentic relationships and fluid conversations, it often still needs to cooperate and communicate with other collectives and individuals to achieve its aims. The instant reactions of many people is to try and put organizations in place to facilitate this. Organizations take on a life of their own, which draws people's energies away from the tasks at hand. Organizations should be kept to the minimum necessary and only when needed. The basic principle of contacts between collectives is, you only meet when you have something to say to each other. This means two things. First, that you have a concrete idea of what you want to say. Secondly, you must prepare in advance. These principles help ensure that communication does not become an administrative problem. That's from Anti-Mass again. The basic level of organizing is communication. In modern society, communication has exploded, but it has been debased. A conversation is not about exchanging words. It's about developing understanding. We communicate with our entire bodies and demean We communicate with our entire bodies and demeanour, not just language. Misunderstanding leads to problems and a lot of paper, phone calls, or emails being shuffled backwards and forwards. We want to begin by taking the bureaucracy out of communication. The essential thing about it is its directness and its reliability, eyeball to eyeball. Other forms of communication, telephone, letters, documents, etc., should never be used as substitutes for direct contact. In fact, they should serve primarily to prepare contacts. Why is it so important to have direct contact? Because it is the simplest form of communication. Moreover, it is physical and involves all the senses. These fluid communities based around simple structures that allow full participation around communication and cooperating about real needs and desires are an alternative to the rigid organization. For a lot of people, this letting go of control of other people can be scary, but it also can be liberating. It's not an organization, and this makes our task difficult, but more worthwhile. It's great that I don't properly know about individuals or groups somewhere in the country doing fantastic stuff, but that means too that I can't tell them or anyone else how it is or how it should be. It's a radical message that says you're part of something which you can't define beyond your own locality, that links you up with other people you've never met that share a similar spirit, and that you can't speak on behalf of or represent its views or ideology. It's a strange kind of belonging without possessing. That's from Old Hacks It Apart. This is a form that can take on the reality of our diversity and build on our common understandings and objectives, rather than subsuming ourselves to an artificial entity which misrepresents us all. By taking action, people can find common cause with us or come to mutual understandings. If the aim is an ecologically balanced and socially just society, derived through people taking control of their own lives, and so empowered, challenging hierarchy and abuse of power, the how we relate to each other becomes crucial. We do not need to share the same analysis to do all this and more. If, as we learn, we manage to pass on experience, skills, and ideas, then agreement and resonance with these will be taken on by people and or groups of their own accord, without the need for ideology or mission statements. That's also from Old Hacks It Apart. Control should lie with those taking action, those involved in the situation, as their decisions and goals are usually focused on maximizing their efforts to achieve the task in hand, not compromising for the sake of maintaining an organization. Decisions that should be made by those involved in an action are deferred to the organization. Moreover, permanent organizations tend to make decisions based not on the necessity of a specific goal or action, but on the needs of that organization, especially its preservation. That's from Insurrectionary Anarchy, Organizing for Attack, from Do or Die, Issue 10. It is the perceived need for control and the maintenance of that organization's image, of those who have invested in an organization, that are some of the factors that foster elitism in the hierarchy. The organization must always worry about how the actions of others will reflect on the movement. They must therefore attempt to discipline the struggling multitude and try to control how the movement is represented in the media. That's also from Insurrectionary Anarchy, Do or Die, Issue 10. The way we organize is important in all aspects of our lives, but it is of particular importance in relation to ecological resistance. When we resist the forces that are destroying our ecology, we are pitting ourselves against large, established vested interests. If we are effective, they will try to break us. We can use our decentralized organization techniques as a strength and as a defense. Autonomy, especially in the context of struggle against large centralized governments and corporations, is an effective defense mechanism for our movement. It is difficult for them to comprehend and means they can only ever have limited success in breaking us while our will to resist exists. If government is incapable of dealing with a movement where nobody takes orders from anybody else, government is incapable. Through action, autonomy, and revolutionary initiative, we will develop still further. To cope with our activities, the apparatus of oppression will become even more centralized and bureaucratic. This will enhance our opportunities rather than lessen them. That's from Anarchy in Action by Colin Ward. This autonomy of individuals and collectives of individuals maintains the subjectivity of our actions. When taking risks with our own lives and freedom, it's important that we remain in control and that decisions are made from the reality of the situation. Informal organization must be based on an ethic of autonomous action. Autonomy is necessary to prevent our active powers from becoming alienated, to prevent the formation of relations of authority. Autonomy is refusing to obey or to give orders, which are always shouted from above or beyond the situation. Again, that's from Insurrectionary Ecology, Do or Die, issue 10. Our counterculture and resistance should be built from an ever-shifting plethora of networks and relations, where if one becomes more abundant and obsolete, others flower. This autonomy, self-management, and focus on attack, as opposed to the building of organizations, should be joined with uncompromising resistance. We don't wish to barter away our future from a position of weakness, or to help governments and corporations make their capitalism more efficient, or seem more acceptable by offering green concessions. When a system is based on an ever-increasing exploitation and growth that is mutually exclusive to a healthy ecology for all species, then negotiating with these organizations is complicity in their actions. Pragmatism as a strategy may provide dividends to those who believe in the short-term solution for the selected species of museum peace wildlife reserves, but is only total resistance that has a chance of preserving a wild and diverse ecology for the future. This is a similar model of insurrectionary resistance that used by insurrectionary anarchists, for example in the resistance in Sicily in the 80s against the construction of nuclear military bases. These ad hoc autonomous leagues took three principles to guide the organization of struggle: permanent conflict, self-management, and attack. Permanent conflict meant that the struggle would remain in conflict with the construction of the base until it was defeated, without mediating or negotiating. The leagues were self-generated and self-managed. They refused permanent delegation of representatives and the professionalization of struggle. The leagues were organizations of attack on the construction of the base, not the defense of this or that group. That's from Insurrectionary Anarchy again. This model has been used to some success in ecological resistance and animal rights actions in Britain. Attack is the refusal of mediation, pacification, sacrifice, and accommodation in struggle. It is through acting that we learn to act, not propaganda, that we will open the path to insurrection. Although obviously analysis and discussion have a role in clarifying how to act, waiting only teaches waiting. In acting, one learns how to act. That's again from Insurrectionary Anarchy. Organizations, however informal, are made up of individuals, and individuals come with baggage. We all have insecurities, needs, hopes, and dreams. We may wish to develop a better society, but we are, on many levels, products of the society we grew up in. We can be angry, shy, nervous, arrogant, desperate, despairing, and damaged. We have learned many negative ways of relating to situations and others in our world of power plays. One demon that rises in informal organization, as much of any other, is that of status. People feel the need to be valued and recognized by their peers. We look for aspects we value in other people and elevate them in status accordingly. Because of this and the bizarre situations you find yourself in when preparing for and taking direct action, people often play a role: activist, revolutionary, peacemaker, fool, the lists go on. This is not authentic behavior. It is projecting a personality for political or personal reasons. This behavior can atrophy into identification with that role, placing individuals into representational hierarchies, which skews genuine and effective collective organization. The role is a consumption of power. It locates one in the representational hierarchy, and hence in the spectacle, at the top, at the bottom, in the middle, but never outside the hierarchy. Whether this side of it or beyond it, the role is thus the means of access to the mechanism of culture, a form of initiation. It is also the medium of exchange of individual sacrifice, and in a sense performs a compensatory function. And lastly, as a residue of separation, it strives to construct a behavioral unity. In this aspect, it depends on identification. That's from the Revolution of Everyday Life. People often feel trapped in roles, either because they would have played them for so long they would lose security of status if they stopped, although they are forced into a role by the needs and projections of others. It is usually both, often an unconscious conspiracy to preserve the illusion. When people act inauthentically, they preserve hierarchy. Access to the role occurs by means of identification. The need to identify is more important to power stability than the model identified with. The risks involved in taking direct action place many strains on the individual. The identification with a role can add to this. For example, if you are associated with being a hardcore activist, and you have played up to this role, then a certain type of behavior is expected of you, even when you don't feel up to it. Eventually, self-sacrifice to role leads to burnout or disillusion. This can have a knock-on effect for others who identify with the role you played. The hero sacrifices the power of his role and his rifle, and when finally he is burnt out, He follows Voltaire's advice and cultivates his garden. Meantime, his mediocrity becomes a model for the common run of mortals. That's from the Revolution of Everyday Life again. People behave in these ways because of real needs, desires, and insecurities, and the fear of them being themselves. Being truly yourself is the only thing you can maintain in the long run, and the fairest thing to yourself and others if you wish to participate genuinely in sustained collective organization. These are roles and habits that we fall into. We may find that we have to be active in guarding ourselves and each other against these patterns of behavior. The elimination of authoritarian hierarchical structures is important for democratizing groups, but does not mean the rejection of all structures. Groups that have taken the latter course have generally become ineffective, or have reverted to the same but no longer explicit authoritarian leadership as before. Good group functioning is a product of cooperative structures, the intelligent, responsible participation of the group's members. That's in the Resource Manual for a Living Revolution. If an informal meeting between a few long-term friends then using structures in an informal meeting between a few long-term friends, then using structures and organizing techniques might not be needed, as long as you are all being honest and feeling confident at the time. But, to be truthful, sometimes it's difficult to be honest to yourself, and confidence comes and goes. All these problems are magnified when working in larger groups, and with people that you don't have intimate relationships with. People will balk at using group skills and facilitation techniques often when they are not familiar with using them effectively, and occasionally because they undermine their power. The Facilitation and Group Work Guide, the Resource Manual for a Living Revolution, points out some of the reasons why this might happen. New tools and skills frequently feel awkward the first time that they are tried. The process used to learn them often contradicts ingrained patterns of behavior such as domination, competition, withdrawal, criticism, and cynicism. Many of the tools in this manual are specifically designed to shake us out of stereotypical roles into which we have functioned for a long time, such as leader, follower, expert, teacher, and student. These learned roles and behavioral patterns have been useful in the society in which we live, but they get in our way when we try to create more flexible alternatives. There are plenty of facilitation and group work techniques out there designed to encourage full participation and challenge hierarchy for people to experiment with. Here's some advice given in Everybody Stop It, EF, and Invisible Hierarchies. How did they get here and how do we get rid of them? Here's the beginning. I have to acknowledge the existence of and learn to recognize invisible hierarchies. I have to assume, even if I don't yet know how, that I am perpetuating them, either by taking more power or accepting less power. I have to talk about this to people I work with, and honestly ask for their thoughts and their help in identifying how I perpetuate them. I have to listen to what they say, and try changing my behavior as if it were true, whether I agree or not. I have to look at my own background to understand why I act as I do, and actually begin to change who I am. I have to become someone who instinctively shares power. I have to personally commit to learning, using, and demanding the use of the tools for organizing equally that already exist at all times. I have to learn insight, courage, and tact, to confront power inequalities where I see them, with humility, with compassion, with privacy if possible, with humor if not. There are no exceptions. These 7 steps apply to you reading this. Yes, that's you. That's the end of the chapter.